Students and members of the general public have gone to the streets in major cities around China, with demonstrators in Shanghai asking for Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party to stand down, a rare occurrence in China where dissent is rigorously prohibited. So what actually happened in that protest? Keep watching to know more about the incident. Hello guys, welcome back to the channel and greetings. Today's video will show you Xi Jinping got down by the protests in China, so stay focused. You won't believe that the frustration and dissatisfaction with China's zero-COVID policy have sparked large-scale protests in more than a dozen cities on a scale not seen since the 1989 Tiananmen Square rallies. These youth-led social demonstrations included open requests for reform in COVID-19 policy, government, and politics. The main takeaway from the Chinese scenes is that, despite increased control and security, the suppression of policy discussions in a more centralized bureaucracy may spark social upheaval overnight. At least 1,000 protesters in two separate groups were collected along Beijing's Third Ring Road near the Liangma River early Monday and refused to disperse. A BBC reporter was jailed in the city late on Sunday after being seen on tape being beaten and stomped by police. Edward Lawrence was shown on camera being pulled to the ground while wearing shackles and yelling, "Call the consulate immediately," in another video posted to social media. A representative for the BBC stated, "The BBC is very troubled by how our reporter Ed Lawrence was treated when he was detained and handcuffed while reporting the demonstrations in Shanghai." The spokeswoman said that Lawrence reported the demonstrations as a licensed journalist. On Sunday morning UK time, Lawrence, a senior journalist and camera operator for the BBC's China desk, was tweeting from the protest site in Shanghai. "I'm at the site of yesterday night's amazing anti-COVID zero rally in Shanghai," the author stated in his post. "There are a lot of people gathered here silently observing." The surge of protests throughout China demanding an end to the brutal zero-COVID restrictions is unmatched in the country's history. People held up pieces of white paper as a sign of protest following a tragic fire in a Zhanjiang community that he had placed under lockdown. Over the weekend, demonstrators could be heard yelling, "Xi Jinping, step down." To openly reject the Chinese president is a courageous and hazardous move. Beijing's strongman was recently re-elected for a third term, defying convention and solidifying his unrivaled power base. How bad is Xi's situation? So yet, there is little indication that Xi's standing at the head of the Communist Party has suffered major harm. Nonetheless, it is the first big manifestation of public opposition to Xi's authority, and the frustrations aimed at the Chinese government's top are too loud to be ignored. Zero COVID is Xi's political initiative, with the public publicly criticizing the policy's symbols, such as severe PCR test requirements and mask laws. He will undoubtedly be held personally responsible for the popular outrage. Ho Feng Hung, a scholar at Johns Hopkins University who specialized in China's protest movements, believes the government and society are in the process of establishing a new balance. Conflicts and instability may arise throughout the process. Xi's timing might have been worse if the demonstrations had occurred before the 20th Communist Party meeting last month, when he was re-elected to a record-breaking third term. The most recent similar incident was the 1989 student protest at Tiananmen Plaza. However, that movement was significantly bigger in scope and occupied the famous square in the center of Beijing. This year, most young people protesting COVID restrictions had little or no remembrance of the tragic demonstration more than 30 years ago. Not only had they not yet been born, but under the censorship system, no film of Tiananmen Square was accessible. In some ways, the greatest frightening shock to Xi may be the political awakening of so many young, educated minds willing to speak out openly against him. According to Kai Zia, a defector from the Communist Party's ideological school who now resides in the US, students from more than 100 colleges have supported the demonstrators. Despite arrests, the police have avoided a deadly crackdown on the protesters. There were also reports of violent attacks, like those of BBC journalist Ed Lawrence, who was covering the demonstration in Shanghai. The police presence was greatly increased on Monday after an active weekend. Some streets in Shanghai, for example, have been barricaded off, making some of the country's richest areas no-go zones. Due to the massive police presence, there were no reports of demonstrations in Beijing, Shanghai, or other major mainland cities on Tuesday, according to the Associated Press. At this point, it's unclear if the turmoil has ended or whether demonstrators are just waiting for their next chance. Some institutions have also announced intentions to send students home for the Christmas vacation earlier than usual, ostensibly discouraging them from organizing more demonstrations. For the time being, the Chinese Communist Party has reacted by relaxing certain viral prohibitions in the face of rising daily case counts, indicating a shift in stance in the face of escalating objections. Throughout the year, consumers have voiced dissatisfaction with access to medical treatment and difficulty purchasing food due to delivery service overload. Some people complained about terrible conditions in quarantine centers and wondered why individuals who tested positive had to be locked up even if they were asymptomatic. Others have expressed outrage at the policy of isolating COVID-positive infants and young toddlers from their parents. Recent demonstrations indicate that all of these feelings are now merging. These are the first statewide protests in decades, with participants ranging from university students to small business owners to ordinary Chinese residents. It was sparked by a fire in Urumqi, Xinjiang, which killed 10 individuals purportedly in a lockdown building. It was also in response to a recent bus tragedy in Guizhou province, which killed 27 people on their route to a quarantine facility. The administration should have paid attention to zero-COVID wariness and complaints. However, you would have only achieved this if politicians had been more sensitive to social media concerns and consultative with public health experts and social organizations. If Xi wants further proof of the perils of his chosen path, he has to look at the aftermath of Zhang's death. Many Chinese have lamented the death of the former CCP head and Chinese president. China elected a leader after the deadly suppression of the Tiananmen Square uprisings. Nonetheless, many see him as representing a bygone age when China was considered more open and accepting of differing viewpoints. The Chinese authorities should know that eliminating COVID-19 via lockdowns and routine testing is impossible. It is due to the vast number of asymptomatic patients. The crowds in protest footage from Shanghai, Beijing, Nanjing, Chengdu, and other cities are typically tiny, ranging from a few hundred to over 1,000 people. Rather, Xi's heavy-handed suppression of social dissent during his presidency, his simultaneous expansion of public spending, and targeted poverty alleviation, which has bought the affections of the underclasses, has sparked the current wave of protests. People's tolerance for the government's zero-COVID policy is a recurrent thread in these demonstrations. The government's arbitrary, dynamic zero-COVID policy deprives the population of their freedom and rights, resulting in many humanitarian tragedies. A fire at a lockdown Urumqi apartment complex sparked a nationwide protest by students and members of the public as people around the country gathered to mourn the lives lost in the fire. Wuhan, where the virus originally broke out, was the first Chinese city to be shut down. For more than 2 months, the people of Wuhan were kept silent. Tianjin, Xi'an, Shenzhen, and other cities followed suit, with varying degrees of lockdown. They too were quietly endured. When Xi shut down the whole city of Shanghai for 2 months beginning in April, the population again suffered in silence. What has changed since then? Outside observers were taken aback by China's recent anti-lockdown rallies. How did what seemed to be widespread popular support for lockdown measures in 2020 give way to today's extreme demonstrations? Xi Jinping, China's leader, addressed a gathering of Communist Party comrades a few years ago, conjuring the image of an unforeseeable peril. "And look out for gray rhinos," the General Secretary said, referring to another form of danger that goes unnoticed since it is in plain sight. Now, almost 4 years after Xi issued those warnings, he is facing public demonstrations that are the government's most audacious domestic political threat in decades. How and if he resolves it may depend on which of his selected metaphors he feels is the most perplexing to him. What choices does Xi have? They're scarce. Xi has always preferred rigorous lockdown measures in the fight against the coronavirus. China continues to reject Western mRNA vaccines, which have shown more success in combating the current coronavirus strains. In Beijing, for example, the number of cases quadrupled over the weekend and continued to grow by Tuesday. Nonetheless, the current countrywide numbers of over 30,000 new cases daily account for just a minuscule proportion of the country's 1.4 billion inhabitants. Since the epidemic started, around 5,200 people have died from the virus. The abrupt removal of lockdown measures would likely result in an increase in infections among an unvaccinated populace. On the other hand, opting for Western vaccinations would result in public humiliation for the guy in command. In Beijing, the most likely course of action is more of the same. That's all we have for you today. Look at Xi Jinping got down by the protests in China. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see all future videos, subscribe to the channel and switch on notifications. First and foremost, what do you think about these leaders? And how can you justify them more precisely? Please participate and share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching.